We begin this edition with the latest on the Russia-Ukraine war. It's the Russian forces that have claimed that they've captured the city of Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine, along with Vovchansk, a city in the northeast region.
The morning air at 1,000 feet was cold and clear. For the Ukrainian MiG-29 pilot, call sign Reaper, the last 12 minutes had been routine. A low-level nap of the earth dash terrain masking, his approach, the engine humming a familiar tune. His target was a Russian ammunition depot near Ork, a high-value node feeding the front lines. In his mind, he was already running through the attack profile for the 2 GBU-39 glide bombs on his wings. He never heard the radar emission that sealed his fate. 120 kilometers away, near Miltopo, the monolithic Gravestone radar of an S-400 Triumf battery completed its sweep. Its thousands of individual transmitter-receiver modules, scanning electronically without moving, paused a return, a low, fast blip. Algorithms classified it: fighter, hostile, track established. In Reaper's helmet, a steady, piercing tone erupted the missile launch warning. It wasn't a beep, it was a scream. A punch of pure adrenaline straight to the heart. Lock, missile in the air. His eyes darted to the thread display. S-400, 120 kilometers. One of the four 8N6E3 missiles, a 180-kilogram warhead packed with explosive bad news, was already climbing into the sky. At Mach 2+, it would cover the distance in 80 seconds. 90 if the gods of aerodynamics were feeling generous. 80 seconds to live? Think. Training overrode panic. At this range, the missile was being guided by the ground radar. His only hope was to break its lock. He wrenched the control stick hard right, standing the MiG on its wing, while his left hand jabbed the chaff dispenser. The aircraft shuddered, slicing through the air to present a perfect 90-degree aspect angle to the incoming radar beam, a move pilots called notching. For 8 agonizing seconds, he held the perpendicular heading. Behind him, programmed bursts ejected clouds of aluminum chaff. Millions of tiny strips fluttered into his wake, expanding into a drifting metallic cloud, each strip reflecting radar energy like a microscopic mirror. One aircraft suddenly looked like 100 ghostly returns, all moving at wind speed. In the S-400 engagement center, the operators watched their screen. The fighter's track, once a solid, confident icon, began to flicker. The Doppler radar, designed to separate fast-moving targets from ground clutter by measuring their speed toward or away, was confused. Reaper's perpendicular maneuver zeroed out his radial velocity. To the computer, he now looked identical to stationary terrain, a hill, a building. The algorithm scrambled to sort truth from deception. Track quality degraded, solid, intermittent, lost. The 48 N6 missile seconds from receiving a fatal update suddenly went blind. Its inertial guidance switched to a backup mode, flying dumbly toward the last predicted point of intercept. But Reaper was already gone. He had shoved the stick forward, nosing the MiG into a dive, seeking the sanctuary of the deck. The hard, radar-cluttered earth, 500 feet above the rolling farmland, he leveled off, his breath coming in, ragged gasps. He checked his 6. The missile's smoke trail dissipated harmlessly in the morning haze, its proximity fuse detonated by nothing but aluminum rain. Round 1 to the pilot, but he felt no triumph, only a colder, deeper dread. The S-400 wasn't some old Soviet system that gave up when it lost lock. It learned, it remembered. His position, his speed, his heading, all fed into a predictive algorithm. It was calculating where he would go next, where the terrain would force him to fly, and it would be waiting. He had bought himself. The Russian operators weren't angry, they were adaptive. The Gravestone radar's true power wasn't raw energy, it was its frightening flexibility. With a few keystrokes, they switched modes, abandoning the Doppler search that had just failed. They activated bistatic mode. Think of radar like a flashlight in a dark room. Normally, the light transmitter and your eye's receiver are in the same place. Bistatic mode separates them. The transmitter stayed near Miltopo, pumping out energy, but the receiver was now a separate mobile unit, positioned 40 kilometers away. at a different angle to the target. It was like watching from around the corner. In Reaper's cockpit, his radar warning receiver blared again, detecting the powerful transmitter signal. He cursed, jinking the aircraft, but the RWR was blind to the silent passive receiver 40 kilometers away, which was now catching the faint reflections bouncing off his MiG from a completely different geometry. The return signal was weak, flickering, but it was enough. A faint, ghostly icon reappeared on the Russian screen. Track reestablished. This time, they didn't launch. They had a better idea. They would hand him off 10 3-hours valley approach to work. Reaper was trapped in a canyon of his own making. To avoid radar, he'd followed a valley that offered good terrain masking. It was the logical route, the safe route, the predictable route. The S-400's computers had calculated exactly that. On a slight rise overlooking the valley, a Buk-M3 teller, transporter, erector, launcher, and radar lay dormant. Its crew had been waiting, fed a constant stream of data from the S-400 network. They didn't need to search. They had the blueprint of Reaper's death already loaded. Altitude, 500 feet. Speed, 480 knots. Heading, 067. Time to arrival, 85 seconds. It was an execution, not an interception. The Buk-M3 S-36M radar mast rose with a hydraulic whine. From cold to radiating in 3 seconds, its phased array already pointed at the exact slice of sky where the MiG would emerge from behind the ridge. The pilot's RWR exploded with a new, terrifying warning. Buk acquisition. Signal strength maximum. Track mode achieved. Ambush. At this range, launch was imminent. 4 seconds. Reaper's eyes swept the terrain. Ridgelines boxed him in. Climbing would expose him to the entire integrated air defense network. Diving meant plowing into the earth. The Buk had him in a perfect kill zone. Two 9M317M missiles erupted from their tubes with a roar, their solid fuel motors accelerating them past Mach 1 before they even cleared the tree line. Each 690 kg missile could pull 35 Gs in terminal phase turns no human pilot could survive. Impact in 31 seconds. The old rules didn't apply. These weren't fire and forget missiles. They were command-guided, slave to the ground radar until the final moment. Breaking the radar lock wouldn't save him. The missiles would keep coming, guided by their last instructions. He had one option left, a brutal, energy-killing move that was the aerial equivalent of a Hail Mary. He pulled the stick into his gut and rammed the throttles to the stops. The MiG's nose shot upward in a maximum performance climb. 7.5 Gs slammed him into his seat 7.5 times his body weight. His G-suit inflated, crushing his legs and abdomen, fighting to keep blood in his brain. Grayness tunneled his vision. Through the narrowing haze, he watched the altimeter unwind 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 feet. At 4,500 feet, as the MiG bled off speed approaching a stall, he fired his entire remaining chaff payload and performed a desperate, gut-wrenching maneuver, an inverted barrel roll. The first missile, confused, tried to follow and failed, shooting past 100 meters below. The second, smarter, predicted his flight path, but Reaper broke the pattern mid-roll, shoving into negative Gs and diving back toward the ground. The missile corrected too late, overshooting by 200 meters. He had survived, but the cost was catastrophic. Critically low, airspeed 180 knots, barely above stall, he was a sitting duck. And below, the Buk crew was already reloading. The 9T-243 transport vehicle backed up, its crane swinging a fresh 9M317M onto the launcher with robotic efficiency. Reload time, 45 seconds. Reaper's climb to weapon release altitude would take 90. He was out of time, 10-8 hours. The gamble. As the fourth and fifth Buk missiles launched, the crew made a critical error. They fired both simultaneously, not staggered. A small mistake? Reaper, now at 14,000 feet, held his course for 12 agonizing seconds, letting his GBU-39 glide bombs GPS receivers acquire satellites. At the last possible moment, with the missiles closing at 4 times the speed of sound, he pickled his weapons. Bombs away. The GBU 39 seconds dropped, their wings snapping open. Instantly, Reaper rolled inverted and pulled a crushing 7G turn back toward the Earth. The physics were absolute. A missile traveling at Mach 4 has the turning radius of a freight train. The MiG, bled dry but agile, could flip direction in a fraction of the distance. The two Buk missiles, committed to their high-speed trajectory, carved useless, enormous arcs through the sky, their proximity fuses detonating on empty air. The bombs were on their way, but Reaper's fight was far from over. 10 hours. The Hunter arrives. Leveling at 8,000 feet, Reaper took stock. 1,850 kilograms. Just enough to reach friendly airspace if he flew straight and if no one else intervened. That's when his RWR sang a new song of doom. Search radar, Su-35S, bearing 240, 85 kilometers. Closing fast. This wasn't chance, this was coordinated hunting. The same network that vectored the Buk had summoned a top-tier Russian air superiority fighter. The Su-35S was everything his aging MiG-29 wasn't. Modern, powerful, equipped with an Urbazy radar that could track 30 targets and engage 8 simultaneously. Right now, it was focused on one. Reaper was low, slow, and out of tricks. The Su-35 pilot saw him on his display as a barely moving dot. He pushed his throttles forward. At 55 kilometers, the Russian fired. An R-77 Amramsky active radar missile dropped, ignited, and accelerated past Mach 4. Time to impact, 47 seconds. Reaper waited and waited until the last possible second. Then he did the unthinkable. He pulled the nose up past 70 degrees, bleeding his already meager airspeed to nothing. At 180 knots, nose high, he kicked full rudder. The MiG performed a pedal turn, its nose pivoting around its tail, hanging almost stationary in the sky, a levitating metal sculpture. The R-77's guidance computer was programmed for intercepts against moving aircraft, not objects defying physics. Its logic failed. By the time it defaulted to flying to the last known point, the MiG had fallen out of the sky, dropping like a stone before recovering at 5,000 feet. The missile missed by 300 meters. But the Su-35 still held all the cards. The Russian pilot climbed to 20,000 feet, a perch of total dominance, and rolled inverted, looking down at the struggling MiG. He selected an R-73 infrared Dogfight missile. No radar warning, just the silent, deadly seeker hunting for heat. The dive attack was textbook. At 4 kilometers, he fired. Reaper saw the missile's smoke trail. His final card, he pitched straight up and fired every flare he had. A spiraling wall of 2,000 degrees Celsius magnesium heat bloomed between him and the seeker. The R-73 chose the brightest source and streaked through the flare pattern, missing by 50 meters. 10-14 hours, the gauntlet. With the Su-35 overshooting, Reaper dove for the deck, engines screaming at military power. Ukrainian airspace was 75 kilometers away. But first, he had to run the final gauntlet. At 50 feet above farmland, tracers erupted from a tree line ahead. A radar-guided anti-aircraft cannon with 4 barrels spitting 3,400 rounds per minute had been waiting pre-positioned by the same network. He had 2 seconds to live. Without conscious thought, he rolled inverted and pulled, flying upside down, negative G's pushing him into his harness. The stream of cannon fire passed over his inverted canopy. He could hear the crack of supersonic rounds. The Shilka gunner, confused by the inverted target, struggled as his radar conflated the MiG with the ground. But 3 23mm rounds found their mark, punching through his vertical stabilizer. 2 more tore into the wing. Warning lights flooded the cockpit. Hydraulics failed, the controls went stiff and heavy, but he was through. Smoking, bleeding fluids, but through. 10-15 hours payload delivered. 8 kilometers behind him, the first GBU-39 found its mark. The smart bomb, having navigated through jamming, adjusted its fins one last time and dove through the roof of the Russian battalion command post. Its intelligent fuse counted layers, steel, insulation, concrete, and detonated precisely in the center of the operations room. The brain of the Russian advance ceased to exist in 0.003 seconds. A fraction later, the second bomb penetrated the ammunition bunker. 500 tons of artillery shells, Grad rockets, and mortar rounds waited. The chain reaction was apocalyptic. The concrete roof contained the cataclysm for a tenth of a second before vanishing, a volcanic plume of fire marking the depot's grave. 10-17 hours home. Reaper crossed into Ukrainian airspace with every system screaming. Engine temperature off the scale. 30 kilograms. Hydraulics gone. A forward strip emerged from the haze. No time for procedure. He lowered the gear manually. The main wheels locked. The nose gear dropped at the last second. The engines flamed out as he turned off the runway, rolling to a stop in a cloud of smoke and steam, the aircraft a sieve of holes and patches. But home, he sat for a moment, the silence deafening after the roar of survival. He had beaten the S-400's logic. He had outfoxed the Buk's ambush. He had danced with a Su-35 and dodged a Shilka at treetop height. But as he unbuckled, he knew the truth. He hadn't won. He had just survived. The network that hunted him was still out there, learning, adapting, waiting for the next pilot, the next mission, and it would never, ever forget. Your turn. What part of modern air combat keeps you up at night? The terrifying intelligence of networks like the S-400? The sheer brutality of a close-range dogfight against a superior jet? Or the chess match between drone swarms and integrated air defenses? Share your thoughts below. What should we break down next? The Su-35S versus F-16 Volts, the electronic war, a deep dive into the radar and sensor duel that will define the skies over Ukraine. The Drone Killer's Playbook, how systems like the Panzer S-1 and modern EW are adapting to defeat FPV and reconnaissance drones. Inside the mind of a SAM crew, the pressure, the math, and the split-second decisions from the other side of the launch button. Let me know in the comments. The most requested topic wins the next deep dive. This was the reality of a single mission. A ballet of physics, psychology, and overwhelming violence where survival is measured in seconds and mistakes are measured in fireballs. Bye for now.